Okay, well, welcome. I'm Paul Monahan. This is the Most Important Game podcast, and we've got an excellent discussion today, a fantastic guest. Let me tell you about Rob Nielsen. Rob is one of these guys who's a lifelong growth mindset guy. He's a student of leadership, performance, and culture. He's a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point, so he's an Army guy for sure. He was a captain and a scout pilot in the U.S. Army, and he's gone on after his time in the Army is to be a publisher, writer, speaker. And Rob and his team work today to engage with their clients and their senior leaders and their teams and their organizations so that they can develop leaders, align cultures, and accelerate success. So, really looking forward to our conversation with Rob today about playing better, struggling less, and enjoying more in a number of different contexts. So I have all these questions for you, Rob. I want to talk about your background, kind of how you got to the military academy at West Point, and what you're doing today with your clients. So welcome. Great to see you.
Oh, thanks for having me, Paul. It's always great to talk to you.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, let's start at the beginning, right? Tell me about where you grew up and how you got to West Point. I want to know that story.
Wow, that's an interesting story. So
we have time.
I grew up on the central coast of California, just up in Santa Barbara County, but not where all the money was. And my father passed away when I was very young, and so we struggled a bit, and then my mother remarried, and my mom remarried this guy that just had a huge capacity to love and nurture us, and exposed me to a lot of different things. Always do the right thing. That was always a mantra in our house.
Nice.
Have the right person do the right thing at the right time, first time, every time. And that was on a 3x5 card in our house. And when I got to high school age, like so many kids, I wanted to go play football. And my parents were like, no, not playing football. And turns out the high school that I went to actually had a really strong water polo program. And I started playing water polo, and we ended up being the CIF champions, the California Interscholastic Federation champions my junior year, became an All-American. And the coaches that we had, they produced a lot of kids that went to service academies. A lot of them went to the Air Force Academy, a lot went to West Point. And so that was really how I ended up there. There was a little bit of a thing where I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy because they had a top 20 water polo program, and they had cooler uniforms than West Point. But then I found out that my sitting height was too tall to qualify for pilot or navigator training. So they're like, sorry, you can come, but you won't be a pilot or a navigator. And I'm like, well, I want to be a pilot. The Naval Academy said the same thing. West Point said, hey, you get here and you play water polo, you could fly anything the Army's got. And I was literally at West Point for a couple of weeks before I realized that the Army had no jets, and that fly anything the Army has meant helicopters.
Oh, wow.
But it all worked out great.
I didn't realize. I didn't realize that sitting height was like a qualifying factor. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, your sitting height is outside of the parameters.
Well, I've got a long torso, and come to find out, you could get waivers for it. Met a guy who was a basketball player years later at an Air Force officers club that we were traveling through when we were flying. But anyway, be that as it may, I wouldn't change anything. Played water polo, boxed, had a great time at West Point. Was not the most academically stellar individual, but a lot of that, I think, goes back to that mindset thing. And I didn't understand the difference between fixed and growth mindset in those days. But I was in a situation where people had been telling me for a couple of years that, wow, you are a natural. You're just a born athlete. And I was afraid of challenging myself to grow further and further and further, because it's like, what if I fail? I'm at a at a very competitive level here, and we're surrounded by other people that are just as capable, and I don't want to lose that moniker of, oh, you're a gifted athlete, and in a lot of ways kind of stymied me. I didn't take on greater challenges until after I graduated from West Point and got out into the Army, went to flight school, and realized, this is just not serving me well. So I started to really challenge myself much, much more diligently in all aspects of my life.
That's interesting. So the part that wasn't serving you well, you mean like not having a growth mindset wasn't serving you well?
Yeah, yeah, having a fixed mindset that, what, wow, they've given me this, they've told me that, wow, you were born with all this ability and that you're a natural athlete. And like so many people with a fixed mindset, once you've been kind of anointed as being this or being that, the research is pretty clear. You are less likely to take on greater challenge, because what if you fall down and somebody comes
Right.
back and says, oh, I guess he wasn't a natural, not recognizing that falling down is part of the growth. You've got to until you fail, you have no idea what the ceiling is at that moment. Then you can recalibrate and figure out a new method to train yourself up to get beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. I'm curious, like, do you remember, like, was there like a moment where, like, the clouds separated and like you realized that was true for you? Or like, what was that like? What was that insight?
Oh boy, I as you mentioned in the introduction, I'm a lifelong learner, and I have learned most of the time the hard way. Um, my dad used to say I learned through the brute force method. Everything I did, nothing was finessed. I just had to keep walking through walls until I figured it out. And so it was, and I changed the behavior, but it wasn't until much later, and as I was reflecting, that I was actually able to see that this is what was going on. I was afraid of failing, and while I still had tremendous success, I probably could have done even more, and I try now to do a little bit more every day.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. Are people surprised by that when they hear that story from you, Rob?
I Paul, you always manage to do this with me. I don't share that story that often. Well, in fairness, I actually have recently started sharing it, and nobody's actually come up and challenged me on it yet. So, or acted surprised or anything. So I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. I do think that it's a crazy thing about these spaces that we grow up in where we excel in, right? They become part of our identity. They become a part of who we are. And it's just real easy to get, the word isn't tricked, or it's to come to believe that being successful is part of my identity in this performance domain. And so it means I have to be successful in every other performance domain. And if I can't be, if I don't think I would be, then I'm not risking it.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny that you say that, because I think in water polo, which was kind of my sport at the time, I did develop that fixed mindset. Still excelled, but could have tried harder.
Mm-hmm.
In boxing, I fully embraced it, and I don't know if it was because I really wanted to grow and maximize my ability as much as it was I didn't want to get my ass kicked. I didn't want to get knocked out.
It's a good strategy, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. But worked hard and trained hard, and continued to develop those skills with a teammate. that constantly challenged me, gave me feedback, everything that you need to do in a deliberate practice environment to
Oh, nice.
to achieve an 18-3 record with 12 knockouts.
Dang, that's crazy, right? Okay, so here's one for you. How how good were you at taking feedback?
Oh, wow, that is a great one. You know, in high school, and to a certain extent, even at West Point, feedback for me was usually, and again, as I mentioned, I had some great coaches that were really able to look at the individual and give them what they needed
Hmm.
in order to continue to grow. And my coaches, the methodology that they used was, you know what, you're being lazy. You could do so much more. Quit, get off your ass. Go put a weight belt on while you're swimming. And the more they told me I couldn't, the harder I tried. And that was their thing to inspire me, was to tell me that I wasn't good enough and that I couldn't accomplish it. And it's like, and those were the times when I was like, oh yeah, well, I'll show you.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense, and that's certainly a methodology for coaching. I think it was a big part of coaching a long time ago, or at least, right? I mean, it seems like that's coaching is maybe a little more nuanced these days. I don't know.
I would hope it is. Yeah, it feels like it was very much kind of like the boys in the boat kind of coaching.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. I actually worked with a guy who, as my coach for a very specific project that I was working at, and he came from a college football paradigm, and like no coach I ever had, he was so in my face, Rob, all the time. Right? It was crazy. He was like that. I would produce a piece of work or something, and he'd be like, "What a piece of crap! I cannot. That is garbage. That is garbage, and you are garbage." Like he was so he would lean in so hard, and I'm not sure that was like there were times where I was like, "Oh, I get what you're doing. I'm gonna listen for a minute," but there were other times I was like, "I don't know." So
Yeah. No, I think that there was a lot of that kind of coaching that went on, back when we were younger. And I would like to think, I would hope to think that there's a lot more Ted Lasso kind of coaching going on in the world nowadays.
yeah, I think there's definitely space for that. I'll go back to this other coach who, by the way, he's a very good coach, and he says this line about what is a good coach? A good coach is the coach or is the person in your life who will say the right thing at the right time in the right way. Right thing, the right time, the right way, in the right way. So I think sometimes we need sort of the proverbial, kick in the tail.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Especially
Other
when
times
you're
it's something else.
dealing with the young men who are so easily distracted.
No doubt. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, okay, so did you have a sparring partner? I want to go back to this boxing thing. I love this thread on taking feedback, right?
Yeah. So the guy who was my boxing partner, he best friend to this day, part of the
Love
All
that.
American leadership team, best man at our wedding a few months ago, and he was like a welterweight, and we would go to the gym every afternoon after class, and we would run stairs until we would challenge the crap out of each other. It was
Hmm.
like I know you've got one more set of stairs, and we would run the stairs at the gymnasium there at West Point, and it was like it was 6 flights up, 6 flights down, And it's like, I know you can do one more set. And then we'd go and we'd do the bag work and hit the heavy bag. And by the time we would leave, we would go and we'd jog a couple of miles on the indoor, or half a mile or a mile on the indoor track. And we would leave and we could barely lift our hands above our heads. And it was because we challenged each other. And yeah, and we formed a bond that lasts to this day. If I needed a kidney, Mike Lorario, you're on speed dial.
Nice. Thank you, Mike. That's awesome. So, okay, so how do those experiences shape who you become, what you step into, and I think more importantly, like how you step into those things that were important for you?
Yeah, I came to a not an epiphany, but I came to a place probably 15 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that. I'd always worked to be a good person, worked to try and do the best I could at whatever it was I was doing. But I kind of got to this personal crossroads about 15 years ago, and I decided I am going to surround myself by people like Mike, that I aspired to have their character, to have their grit, their determination, and that I wanted to just constantly use them as the bar that I wanted to try and attain. And initially, it was a group of folks that I had known from the military academy or from the military. And that has expanded today to just some of the most amazing and inspiring leaders of character that you could ever imagine. Men and women, military, fire, corporate backgrounds, and to where we have unified around this common purpose of inspiring, empowering, and challenging leaders to create high-performing cultures. And that's what we aspire to do. And that's how we measure success, is if we feel like we are actually doing that. And in so, we obviously have to eat our own cooking. And
Yes, yeah.
so we have just developed this amazing culture where people are constantly, hey, you know what? We could say this in 10 fewer words, or we could ask this question in a different way, and it's gonna really just pull people and get them more inspired, get them more engaged and committed to their own growth. And it's been an amazing journey to see how that unfolds for folks.
Oh, that's amazing. So so where you are today in your all-American leadership work and in all of the ancillaries, in all that network really began for you something like 15 years ago?
Yep.
A decision to surround yourself.
Financial crisis.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, I love that. So you leave the military academy and they say, hey, we do have an aircraft for you. It's not a jet, but you'll fit in it.
Right.
So tell me about going to flight school and becoming a helicopter pilot.
I will tell you, Paul, that every day at flight school was the best day of my life.
Are you serious? That is awesome.
There was never a day, and that, granted, some of this was, August in lower Alabama, and it's 95 degrees with 95% humidity, and you get into the aircraft, and you got long sleeve Nomex and gloves and helmets, and you're just drenched, and I would still have this huge grin from ear to ear that I'm in flight school. I am learning how to fly. And flight school was just a fascinating experience. I had made the decision, I'm not going to just be a dumb jock, which was kind of the persona that I hid behind when I was at West Point. And I was like, I am going to lean into this and I am going to do absolutely the very best I could. And I ended up graduating in the top two, I think it was, in my flight class. And
Can I interject, Rob? Wait, are you saying that you would maybe hide behind this? Well, I can be a dumb jock and I don't have to be as smart as
people
maybe the
wouldn't
others.
expect as much of me.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
And so, yeah. And boy, we could dig into that. And there's a lot of threads that could get pulled there, but let's stay on flight school.
Yeah, I'm with it. Yeah. Sorry.
But
Thanks.
yeah, and so what was so great about that was that I think it was the top 5%, top 10% would get selected to go in the scout track to become an Aero Scout. And if you can imagine, it's almost like an oxymoron, but as an Aero Scout, your job, your mission was to fly this helicopter 140 miles an hour and sneak up behind the Russian tanks. This is back in the 80s, and you're expected to sneak up behind the Russian tanks. And so you were flying, you're flying down riverbeds, with maybe 10 feet on either side of the rotor disc at 140 miles an hour, maybe 10 feet off the water, and you're just zipping around. And it was better than any Disneyland ticket you could get.
The best kind of flying ever, right?
Absolutely. And one of my closest friends from grade school, who I went to West Point with and ended up going and was at flight school at the same time with, he ended up being one of the most highly decorated helicopter pilots, Apache pilots in the first Gulf War. And as a reward, he got to go on and do some amazing things, including go and fly jets. He got to go to the Naval Flight School and learn how to fly jets. And I remember talking to him one day, and I'm like, "So Pat, what's the coolest flying you ever did? You've flown everything." And he's like, "Yeah, I've flown a lot of things." And he said, "Flying a jet at Mach 1 or Mach 2 is pretty cool." He said,
Because you get the badge, right? You get the badge for
you're
that.
going so fast,
Yeah,
right?
you get the merit badge for that.
But no adrenaline equivalent to like that zero margin for error type of flying that we did as scouts. And so I always look back at that with just a tremendous amount of fondness.
I think that this moment, by the way, it deserves a little break to talk about how Rob Nielsen is featured in a chapter of The Most Important Game, right, Rob? So let's talk about this for just a second here. So let's go. We'll go to the book here. Here we go. This moment brought to you by The Most Important Game. Play better, struggle less, enjoy more. Buy it wherever fine books are sold. I brought up this chapter here, Rob, because there's a story. So let me set this up. The story or the chapter is chapter 18. Where are you looking? And I'm talking about this concept on the golf course. Like, if you stare at the sand trap, you're going to hit it into the sand trap. If you stare at the water and you ruminate over it, you are hitting your ball in the water, right? And the insight that came to me was it happened at Torrey Pines, not too far from where you live, at the glider port there. And I'm watching all these gliders, and I think that I fly a powered paraglider. I think you know that, Rob, right?
I don't know that I did.
Yeah. So I'll tell you about that in just a second. So I'm super interested in these pilots and where they're looking, and I tell this story. So you and I had talked about it, and I said, so here's from the book. So my friend and colleague Rob Nielsen, a former Army helicopter pilot, recently told me, quote, "I remember the first time a flight instructor told me to drop my Scout helicopter into a riverbed at 140 miles per hour with trees soaring above and around us." Probably be hard to see this, but I'll put it up there. With about 10 feet of clearance on either side of the rotor disc. He told me exactly what you said. Look where you want to go and your hands will fly you there. So I love that. And I'm sure you remember that very clearly, very vividly.
Oh, absolutely. And what's amazing is that was just a few short months after the very first time I was ever asked to bring the helicopter up to a hover, and by myself.
This is like weeks
And
later.
or probably maybe 3 or 4 months, five
Yeah.
months tops later.
Yeah.
And where that first time you're hovering, it's like, oh God, are we even going to survive this? And just incrementally, just developing the incremental skills to master the aircraft and be able to use both hands and and both feet to be able to orient the aircraft, this way and this way and this way. And when I think about it, it always reminded me, or reminds me now, of the difference between training and development. And I think, as I was thinking about our conversation today, I surmise that when you are working with players, that it's a developmental thing as opposed to a training thing. And we do the same thing in leadership work. It's
Hmm.
like, I can train you to change the oil in your car, very specific tasks, but there are so many things about swinging a golf club that it goes beyond just the swinging of the golf club. It's like, what club, what's the wind, where are you going? Is there sand or water? And if I'm training, it's like, okay, you're going to do this step and this step and this step, and you're going to develop a finite level of proficiency within this confined amount of time that we have to train,
Hmm.
as opposed to developing where you're constantly trying to up your skill level forever. And there's a certain emotionality to it as well. It's not just going through the motions, it's the joy of the task and the reward of doing something well, and knowing that you can always be a little bit better, and that it's not like you're ever going to arrive at a place of perfection, nor will you stay at any level without continued focused effort.
Oh yeah, that's great. I love that. Yeah, thanks for that, Rob. One of my mentors, he says that there's a difference between focusing on outcome orientation, where sort of like in training, it's like in some ways when we get stuck as whatever performance domain we're in, when we get stuck in an outcome orientation, in essence, what we're trying to do is prove our competencies. That's where the struggle can happen for us.
Mm-hmm.
But if we can shift and switch our mindset just enough so that we're in a mastery orientation, what changes is that we're trying to we're not trying to prove anything. We're not trying to prove our competency. We're trying to develop it.
Exactly. And so going back to flight school, and specifically the Aero Scout training, when we started learning how to do that nap of the earth type of flying,
Mm-hmm.
where you're trying to be as low to the ground as you can. Once you've developed a certain level of proficiency, a lot of those things become somewhat innate,
Mm-hmm.
and your muscle, your eye hand coordination gets to the place where you don't you don't have to try and think your way through it, because the reality is, you can't. Your brain can't. Well, it can, but you in the front part of your brain can't um, function fast enough to make all the little course corrections that are required to keep from augering into the trees or into the water in that confined space. But if trust the force and look to where you're going, your hands will over time develop enough just innate ability to just do it with, I think the brain can operate, do like billions of functions per second. Your cognitive brain is like maybe 50 or 60 per second. So it's like
Right.
I can be panicked and fly myself right into the water, or I can just like relax and let my subconscious do the thing that I have practiced hundreds and hundreds of times.
Oh, okay. Now I love that language. And a lot of my clients, what in any, any domain, that like that's a conversation we will have on a regular basis. This idea like, all right, hey, you're in this performance domain, and there are times when it seems like the meaning changes, like the stakes get higher, for example, the pressure rises. And if we're not careful, the thing we're really good at gets harder. Right? So like how would that show, like think about, I'm maybe putting you on the spot here a little bit, but can you think about a time in the helicopter, for example, when maybe things went a little bit sideways because of feeling that pressure, that stress, and you went from like here to here, And I'm pointing.
Probably the times plural that I could recall where that specific phenomenon would take place. And I don't think it was just me. I think a lot of pilots experience it. And that's when you're flying in weather. When you're flying what's called
Oh,
IFR, instrument flight rules,
yep.
where you're in the clouds and you don't have any visible horizon or reference points, and you have to trust the instruments. And what's crazy is your body gets this, what they call the leans, and your body starts to feel like you're in a heavy bank turn. And your body is telling you, oh, you're in a bank turn. You need to level out. You need to turn this way, even though the instruments are telling you you're flying straight and level. Just keep doing what you're doing. But your brain starts to play tricks on you, and you start to doubt, and it literally becomes a battle with yourself. And you come out of, whether it's an actual flight, that you're doing, or in a simulator, and you will come out of it drenched with sweat because of the mental battle that you have just waged with yourself. And in
Yes.
real life, it's not uncommon where pilots give up, and they're like, nope, instruments must be wrong, and they fly into a mountain.
Yeah. Is that's in a fixed wing. That's the death spiral that I think we talk. Sometimes you'll hear, right? The death.
Could
Is
be,
that,
yeah.
yeah, where people just get into a tighter and tighter and tighter turn, thinking, well, these instruments aren't right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So weather causes stress and pressure inside of a helicopter.
And I would imagine it feels analogous when you talk about, obsessing about, don't hit it into that water right there.
Yeah.
You know exactly where you want it to go, and yet we still get sucked into, well, there's the sand trap, there's the water feature.
Yeah. And I think, right. And I think I think there's a couple things going on in these performance environments that like some happen very quickly, and these are all things that I'm referring to would be like the amygdala triggers that are going to happen for us because our brains are constantly trying to assess where we're in danger, and in in some cases, like those can't be helped. That's going to happen, right? So if your brain really thinks you're in a turn and you need to level out, and it's going to see that as a threat. Now the question is, do you have the wherewithal, the training and so forth, right, to overcome that part of the brain that wants to protect and keep you alive, that is sometimes going to be a problem. So that happens
Right.
very quickly, I think, right?
Yeah. It also kind of reminds me of, you and I were talking earlier about Eduardo Briseño's work
Oh yeah.
around like learning versus performing. And
Learning
I would
zone and
imagine
performance
there's
zone.
some
Yeah.
connection there. It's like the more you practice and the more you practice to fail, like practice doing things that you just absolutely aren't capable of doing, or, to do it with, I don't know, with a backpack on your back or something. Your ability to overcome in training or in practice better enables you to like not be distracted, not to be losing your focus when you're actually performing in an actual round of golf. Like the more times you're taking swings in different angles, different things on the driving range, I would imagine.
That's a great point. And what just came up for me, Rob, is that you talked about skill development. And of course, now we're talking about practice as well. And these can be very different things, but they're often not conflated, but they're often talked about as if they're the same thing. And I think they're very different. Right? I love this idea that like skill development is a non-negotiable to performing at a high level. Like you have to have that. You got to bring that, right? So work hard. You should spend time there. No question about it. Sometimes I'll refer to skill development as like it's like outside game activity. It's like how do I move my body in a certain way? How do I move the collective and the cyclic in the ways that create a right hand turn or a left hand turn or straight and level flight in a scout, right? But then the practice is different. And the practice is, hey, can I set up a real live scenario and move through it as if I'm moving through a challenge or something?
Yeah, I can see that connection.
So
Yeah.
I think and I'm gonna link this to a place where you and your team, you spend a lot of time in a second. So the way there is, okay, in golf, a lot of people think of practice as I have to go to the driving range and I'll get a bucket of balls and I'll drag them one by one onto the mat, or if I'm on grass, and I'll just hit and hit and hit and hit and hit. And, that's practice, right? And a lot of people think that's practice. And I would submit that while that might look like practice, what that might be, hard to say, it might be bad skill development. Like if you're not doing the right thing.
1,000 balls the wrong way,
Exactly.
you're kind of setting that into your muscle memory, I would imagine.
You are. Yeah, you are.
And
so then
and yet people will say, "Oh, I spent 8 hours at the driving range and hit bucket after bucket after bucket."
Yep.
But if you did it the wrong way, somebody said, Adam Grant's new book, Hidden Potential.
Yep.
He says it's not how hard you work, it's how far you grow. And so if you're doing it the wrong way, it doesn't matter how many hours you put into it.
No doubt. No doubt. So practice then, I think, can be very different. And so practice can be, how do you create the scenarios so that the game you want to play is a game that you can actually play at a higher level? You take all the skills that you have and bring it out to the course. And so the metaphor then becomes, all right, well, I'll develop that just a little bit more. So the idea then would be, what games can I play if I'm on the range? can I say, okay, how close can I hit the next 10 shots to this target or that target? Or, right? I mean, it becomes
A specific
gamifying.
objective.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. Right. And
Well,
then
and
the
I
other
think
thing,
often, and this might be not self-serving, but it might be self-serving to you, is if I don't know, and if I'm just a lay person, that likes to go out and golf on the weekend, or even if I like to be a little bit more competitive than that, if I'm by myself and left to my own devices, I probably don't know all the ways to best create a scenario that will actually lead to growth and performance improvement. And I always go back to Anders Ericsson, peak performance and deliberate practice,
right.
where it's like, you know what, if I'm just a passionate guy and I want to go out and learn how to cook or to golf or play the guitar, I can take some lessons, I can watch some YouTube videos, and that's going to get me so far. But it depends on what my objective is. If I expect that I want to be a low single digit handicap golfer, at some point I probably need outside eyes who are qualified and who I would consider to be an expert, that are going to be able to give me feedback on every different aspect of my game.
Oh,
And that's
100%.
exactly similar to what we do in our work. It's like, I
Absolutely.
don't care how many books you read on leadership, until you are actually out having conversations with people and getting feedback on how your interaction with those people is impacting them, such that they either want to do more and lean in and collaborate, or whether they're bristling and they can't wait to escape.
I love that, Rob. And right, this is exactly what you and your team do. You are there to metaphorically hold up the mirror and let the client see what maybe it's not that easy for them to see.
Yeah. I mean, so often it's like that 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 Johari's window. What are the blind spots that I can't see about, or I don't know about myself, or that I don't see about my physical performance, because I don't have eyes outside my head to say that I'm doing something bad with my elbow or my shoulder or my butt or something.
Yep. Yeah, I love this conversation. So if practice is something that you did in boxing, you did as a water polo player, you did it a lot as a helicopter pilot. But the culture of practice inside organizations, I almost never see that.
Yeah, and it's sad. It's sad because I think we have a culture, a society, where, hey, it's about perfect execution, and where people are afraid to experiment, they're afraid to make a mistake, because if they do, God forbid, they will be ridiculed, or they won't they won't get promoted, or they won't be chosen for the next special project. And so it's like, I have to only do what I know I can do well, and I'm not going to reach beyond that. And it creates a very, very sad existence, both for the individuals in the organization and for the future of the organization.
No, that's a great point. Like they all know there's only 9 boxes. Do you know what I mean? And someone's going to put them in one of those 9 boxes. They'd rather, yeah. That's so good, Rob. I'm because I work a lot in that space. It's like I do see that, and I see that that's a huge opportunity to take these ideas around practice and building game style scenarios, so that people can grow and develop. To your point,
Well, and there's so much. I mean, there's so much research and data. I mean, the body of data around the gamification of skills is overwhelming. I mean, look at your domain, Tiger Woods. You know, love or hate the guy, how he's hit more balls from the time he was like 6 or something like that than most people will in a lifetime. And his dad made it a game. You know, and
Yeah.
there's a bunch of examples where parents made it a game for the kids so that they could continue to challenge them, and they would stay interested as opposed to it becoming like forced labor.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with that. I want to talk a little bit more about the work that you and your team does with your clients, and say a little bit more about exactly what you and your team are doing and who you work with, because I think that's really fascinating as well. And ultimately, I what I really want to try and understand is, like, through all of that work, I'd be curious about, what you see as the model for leaders performing at their best, and then ultimately, what does that create for their team? I kind of dumped a lot at you there, but
Yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces there. I think that the work that we do, if I were to try and encapsulate it, is to create an environment where people can develop to the maximum of their desire. And what we've learned is that trying to like squeeze a lot of content, shoehorn a lot of content into people's brains is an absolute recipe for zero growth. What we've done is using our framework of leading self and then leading in relationships, then leading in teams, and ultimately leading in organizations. It allows this progression, and then starting with kind of, who am I? Who am I? How did I get here? Who do I intend to become? Recognizing I'll probably never get to that position perfectly, but where at least now I've been reflective around that for the first time. 99% of the population has never sat down and said, who am I? What do I stand for? And what's important to me? And then actually be a little bit granular and definitive about it. And what we do is, within that structured framework, we throw a lot of good questions out. We find that people grow more by asking the right questions and chewing on it and thinking about it, and then coming back and thinking about it again a few days later, and doing it in a kind of an iterative growth process. They become much more committed to who they want to be than if I start giving them, in the military, we call them TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. And it's like, if we give you the right little tools and things to say at the right moment, it's like
sure.
sandwich feedback or something. You did
Right.
at this, sucked at this, but you did good on this too. People know that you're being artificial with them. So if you can help people be introspective, reflective, and vulnerable. Vulnerability, I think, is the key to, hey, I don't know the answers. I'm going to fall down. I hate the word fail. I like to say I fell, because failure feels permanent. Falling down, it's insinuated that I'm going to get back up and try again.
Yep.
And if we can get people to get comfortable with failure or falling, then it won't feel so bad. And they'll keep pushing until they have a fall, and now they know what their new limit is. And now I can figure out, how am I going to push that, getting into that flow state of continual growth, because that's where we feel the most fulfilled anyway. And to do that in a culture type dynamic or relationship type dynamic, when you're actually out there showing up with empathy, making yourself vulnerable, I don't know all the answers. Hey, I screwed that up. I'm sorry. people, they want to connect with you more because you feel more relatable. You're more human. You're more like me. And that I don't need you to be Russell Crowe, master and commander with
Right.
all the answers. I
Yeah.
just need you to be competent enough as a leader to be able to like clear the path so that I can do what I'm intending to do. Trust me, be trustworthy. Like you said before, set the bar. Set the bar. What's the expectation? What is the outcome that we need to achieve? And then step back and let people go out and find their own path to getting there. Because their path's going to be different than mine based on what their experience and training's been in the past.
Right. Yeah, I love
So
that.
I don't know if I answered your question,
Yeah,
but
no, it's
I sure
great.
did with excitement.
No, it's awesome. I love the idea of questioning, right? Our friend Kathleen Boyle Dalen, in a recent conversation with her, she was talking about the power of curiosity. And,
Yeah.
it's one of the, while she was saying that she described curiosity, and we talked about it in a few different ways, but one of the ways was that curiosity can be the antidote to defensiveness. Interesting, right?
Absolutely.
Interesting.
100%. That's absolute brilliance. And of course, I would expect that from Kathleen. Um, and I always also look at curiosity as kind of a precursor to what I think is the glue of humanity. In fact, I've heard it called the essence of humanity, which is empathy. And I meet people that are like, oh, empathy and like feeling the emotions of the other person, or even caring about the emotions of the other person. That's a little bit too much for me.
Yep.
But that's okay. Just try and be a little bit curious as a way to put your toe in the water. And it's amazing how quickly that can create momentum. And you can go from curiosity to cognitive empathy. Hey, I know this person's struggling and feeling something, to emotional empathy, to the ultimate, which is compassion, where it's like, you know what? I am feeling so much for this person. I am compelled to take action on their behalf.
I love that. You've thought about this stuff, Rob. I love it. It's so good. It's so good.
Well, like I said, I surrounded myself with just some amazingly smart people, and a lot of their nuggets have eventually trickled into my little brain.
That's great. That's great. What? Why do leaders suffer?
In which regard?
What causes suffering for the leader?
As I am working with countless leaders on a regular basis, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, even prior to COVID. I was interviewed for something else in 2019, and I made the statement that the challenges that leaders face today are bigger, more complex, and they are coming at you faster and faster. And that was 2019, which I think we would all look back on as
Jeez.
like the good old days.
Yeah. Right.
And,
Yeah.
and I was saying that then, and I think that people are in a place today where it's like they talked about resilience a lot during COVID. We're going to be resilient. We're going to get through this. Well, resilience means that there's an expectation that if I can gut through this, we'll get back to the good old days. And the reality is we haven't, because we got through COVID, and then there was the logistics crisis, going on in the world. And then when that started to subside, we started to have a war in Ukraine, and and then we're coming into another political cycle. And it's like, oh my gosh, when is it going to end? The reality is it's not. And so it's like, yeah, resilience, grit certainly has to be, come to bear, but it's more about adaptability, because otherwise change is going to happen, and it's going to be big, dramatic, hairy, audacious change. It's going to happen, And if I'm not expecting it, or I'm expecting it to like get calmer and go back to nice night, nice days, I'm going to get burned out, and that's going to cause me a lot of suffering, a lot of distress. If I can say, hey, the world's just different, it's going to keep being different. I need to figure out how to be more adaptable, and how to find, be grounded and be grateful for the things that I can control. And I feel like there are a lot of leaders out there right now that are suffering mightily because they feel like they're doing everything they can to create a great culture, and the people are not appreciating it. The people are coming back and they're backbiting, or they're complaining, or they're quitting, or they're not giving their best effort. And they're like, oh my gosh, I've done everything I can. And they they feel like if I do this, then I should get this as an outcome. And if it doesn't end up being the outcome, then I failed. Well, you know what? Maybe that's not the right thing. We have to try something else. We just can't give up. I feel like we're in a place of such dramatic change in the world that those of us that are the good guys, that are focused on doing the right things and making the world better, we've got to come together. And the people that are around us, they want to do the right thing. We have to support them, and get them to keep coming together rather than hunkering down to protect themselves because of all the change,
Yeah.
and where they just feel overwhelmed and surrender.
So the leader that can loosen their grip on their own need for certainty, right? How much
Well,
certainty they think they need in their life and their world and in their experience. If they can loosen that grip a little bit,
I think
that
you
serves
just
them
you
well.
just said it perfectly. Loosen the grip a little bit, because I think it's the certainty. I would substitute in the control. So many leaders, particularly mid-level leaders, their identity is so wrapped up in, hey, somebody tells me what the objective is, and then I get to tell somebody else what they need to do. And that's not the role, particularly at the mid-level anymore. That's not the role. It's their role is to empower. Too many moving pieces for any one person to make all the decisions. It's like if I have to be the command and control person and make all the final decisions, I become the crimp in the center of the hourglass. And every grain of sand is another decision that's waiting to be made because I've got to make it. I've got to open that up and let all the people make decisions and feel empowered to do the right thing no matter what comes at any given moment.
I love that. I'm just drawing a picture of an hourglass here, Rob. That is a great visual. I love that. All right, one final question for you here. So I had asked, okay, well, what causes suffering for the leader? Right? What are some of the things that are characteristics of the leaders who are in struggle? Think about the best leaders that you've seen, the best leaders that you've worked with, been on their teams, seen, got to experience up close. What were some of the best qualities that you can think of for the leaders that perform at a high level time and time again?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and I'm glad we're ending on that. For me, the leaders that I have known, the leaders that I have worked with and have seen do amazing things, are those individuals that have enough confidence in themselves to be completely humble and make themselves completely vulnerable. Those leaders that are able to demonstrate so that the other person feels that they genuinely care about them. Because if I know that you genuinely care about me, you can challenge me really, really hard because I know you genuinely care about me. And I think back on those, my high school water polo coaches, one of the most amazing, in fact, he was my officiant at my wedding 6 months ago, my high school water polo coach. I
Nice.
love that man for the rest of my life. And my best man was Mike, my boxing partner. And but they just have this tremendous capacity. You know that when the chips are down, they will always be there for you. And because of that, when they challenge you with candor, you don't get defensive. You don't bow up and say, "Oh, to hell with you." You take it in the spirit it was intended in. And that is such a lubricant for cultures, because imagine if you can develop that kind of trust and psychological safety where people know you care about them, you can cut through all of the nice and all the extra verbiage of, well, Paul, maybe we could talk about this, and you hem and haw for 10 minutes without getting to the thing. Paul, you need to show up at work on time.
Yeah.
And if I could just cut to that, then how much time could we save? And how often do we never get to it? It's like, oh, that Paul, he just never gets to work on time. We're just gonna have to let him go. I didn't care enough about Paul to let you know that what you were doing was not acceptable. But if I can get to that place of candor, man, we can now have the really, really tough conversations. And I have them all the time. Rick Rochelle, who my partner and our president here at All American Leadership, he and I see the world very differently, very, very often. And we can be very direct and very passionate in, I don't agree with you. And 5 minutes later, it's like, so where do you think we should set up camp tomorrow night?
Yeah.
Because we know that we will always be doing it out of care, not out of competition or personality or something.
That's great. Oh, fantastic, Rob. That's great. Love that. Hey, where can our listeners get in touch with you, or how if they wanted to learn more about All American Leadership and the work that you and your team are doing? Where can they reach you?
Thanks for that. Yeah, thank you for that. You can reach us at www.allamericanleadership.com. Very simple website, or reach out to me at any time at rnielsen at allamericanleadership.com. And that's R. Nielsen, like the ratings, RNIELSEN.
That's terrific. Well, Rob, thank you so much for this discussion. Really, really excited to have you on the call today and on the show. It's so many great ideas, and I think for me, I wrote this little book, and it looks like a golf book, but and you and I have talked about it's more than that. It's about life. It's about how we lead. It's about how we move through the challenges that are just a normal part of the world that we live in and the lives that we experience. And
but that's what I loved about your book, Paul, was the fact that as I read it, and I know that I am not yet an accomplished golfer, everything that you spoke about spoke to me, and I would apply to anybody in anybody's life, no matter where the journey takes them.
That's great. Well, so many great things to talk about. So, Rob, thank you for your time, and I'll look forward to catching up soon.
It was my privilege. Thanks, Paul.
You got it. All right, that's a wrap on the Rob Nielsen interview and the Rob Nielsen discussion today. Wow. I mean, this is a guy who has played, if you will, at the most elite levels. Love that. Whether it was water polo or boxing or flying a helicopter in the Army, this is some serious stuff. So appreciated having Rob's insights today on what it takes to lead, play, and perform at your best. Love the work that his organization, All American Leadership, is doing in helping mission critical teams and their clients of all kinds actually build the kinds of thriving environments where these organizations can be at their best when it means the most. Love that. Great work, Rob. awesome to see you today. So once again, I want to thank you all for tuning in today to the Most Important Game podcast. I'm Paul Monahan. My mission is to help you lead, play, and perform at your best. I help my clients to play better, struggle less, and enjoy more. If you'd like to learn more about the work that I do, please visit me at my website. I'm at paulmonahan.com. You can find my book there. It's The Most Important Game. It's the very inspiration for this podcast. Are we allowed to be inspired by our own book? I suppose so. I don't know. The Most Important Game is available in hardcover, paperback, ebook, and Audible. If you're watching on YouTube and you enjoyed our conversation today with Rob and you want to hear more of this, go ahead and consider hitting the like button and subscribing. It really helps us to build the kind of following and bring more of these great conversations to you. If you're listening to the podcast, please hit that follow button so you don't miss an episode. We have an incredible lineup of performers and leaders and people who really care about these concepts. And we're gonna have a bunch of terrific conversations over the next few months. So make sure you're following us so that you don't miss an episode. And if you have any topics that you'd like for my guests and I to cover, just shoot me a note. I'm at paul@paulmonahan.com. Once again, thanks to Kevin Monahan for doing all of our production work on this episode. Thanks so much, Kevin. Until next time, remember, don't give up. Stay in the game. No matter the arena that you're performing in, it is possible for you to play better, struggle less, and enjoy more.